Welcome back, my fellow patriots, to the Save Our Republic daily video series. Yesterday, we finally finished the First Amendment. We're moving on to the Second Amendment, clearly the most controversial of the amendments in recent history in connection with the Bill of Rights. That wasn't the case in the past, but it is today, and it has been for at least a couple of decades. Amendment 2 provides a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to bear and to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there's a couple of unusual words there and phraseology that I want to jump into, and we can explore quickly the origins of what that is, how it has been interpreted recently, where we might go in the future. It begins with a well-regulated militia, and so many people have reasonably argued, well, this is a right that relates to not individuals, but to a militia right, and therefore individuals do not have the right to bear arms. The Supreme Court recently rejected that and said, no, the Second Amendment does apply to individuals and protects individual rights, and that it doesn't have to be in connection with a militia, and that it was just a historical kind of overview of why that right exists, kind of explaining it in context, and they argue that actually the history and original meaning of the Second Amendment provides that it is an individual right. And they also found in a later case that it applies not just to the federal government, but to all state governments. We call that the incorporation doctrine. So what is a well-regulated militia? Well, today it is mostly what we would consider to be the National Guard, but back when the Founding Fathers declared independence and then adopted the Constitution, we didn't have standing armies. Standing armies were considered to be instruments of oppression. And so when there needed to be an army, it would be raised, and then when that crisis, war, whatever it might be, invasion, insurrection, was put down, the army would disband. And instead, every able-bodied man, basically, and of course it depended, there's clearly racial discrimination, other kind of discrimination, but your sovereign citizen, so to speak, that was an able-bodied man from an early age all the way to basically, and it changed, of course, depending on the jurisdiction, but caught 18 to 60 was part of the militia, and they were expected to have a firearm on hand, and that they were expected to be able to be caught into action very quickly to be able to react to circumstances that were surrounding that town or that village or that state, whatever it might be. And in fact, most of the military forces that were used in the American Revolution were not the Continental Army, but were militiamen that were called out on various short-term enlistment periods, and they fought very valiantly along with the Continentals. Now, Washington was in charge of the Continental Army, and he also directed the movements of most of the militia or some of the other Continental generals. But the idea was that this was a widespread militarization of the society, and that everyone was expected to have a gun and to be able to contribute to the defense of the Republic if necessary. And that's why it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So the idea was that the militia would protect the people from invasion, and it was also understood to be an individual right, that each individual would have that ability and to muster, etc. It was well regulated because there was concern that deregulated or laxly regulated militias would not be sufficient to preserve the liberties and freedoms of the people. And there's another side of this which gets very short attention, but it is fundamentally important, which is that the idea of the people being armed hedged against an oppressive government. Remember, there's a founding first principle, the right to abolish or revolt against an oppressive government. And how do you do that? Well, if you have people individually armed in connection with they have the arms, that if there's an oppression against the people, that they could muster and challenge a dictatorship, a standing army, or some other kind of militarized force that might be used against them. It also obviously allows for hunting, and that's one of the big kind of talking points that are used today, but that was, and back then in the founding era, it was really essential because you might actually starve if you didn't have a gun, and self-defense. And you have to remember back then, a lot of people lived on the frontier. There were a number of dangers out there, plus even in your individual home, to stop from a home invasion, a breaking and entering, etc. If you got attacked on the street or in your home, you wanted to be able to protect your castle, protect your property, and protect your person and your family. So all those things came together, that you had this natural, unalienable right to have a weapon. Now, that doesn't mean that you have a right to a bazooka, a nuclear weapon, a submarine, but it certainly means that you have this individual right to possess arms, what you'd consider to be kind of the standard firearm of the day. And there's a lot of arguments on the sides and around this, carry concealed weapons versus open carry versus assault weapons, so-called assault weapons with semi-automatic triggers versus, the whole thing. But there is a fundamental right that has been recognized in the Second Amendment and by the Supreme Court to have the ability to protect yourself and to protect the country and purposes of freedom and liberty, to be armed. And with that, we will return tomorrow. Don't forget about America's Survival Guide at americasurvivalguide.com, Patriot Week at patriotweek.org, the Patriot Lessons American History and Civics podcast, available on all podcast platforms that are major, as well as the Patriot Lessons TV program, also available at patriotweek.org. God bless you, and God bless America.